She's in cardiac arrest. I'm giving CPR.
I said move away!
If I stop, she dies. Call an ambulance.
Get back now!
My eyes!
I'm trying to save her! Get on the ground!
Dr. Mandla Charles was walking past a bustling local street cafe on a sunny afternoon when he saw a white woman collapse onto the sidewalk ahead of him. Without a second thought, he dropped to his knees beside her, checked for a pulse, realized she wasn't breathing, and instantly started performing CPR. But a bystander watching from across the street saw a black man kneeling over an unconscious white woman, and instead of rushing to help, they pulled out their phone and called 911. Frantically claiming an assault was taking place. When Officer Larry Lincoln arrived and saw Dr. Charles doing chest compressions, he didn't assess the medical emergency. He didn't ask questions. He aggressively interrupted the life-saving compressions, drew his weapon, and forced the doctor away from the dying woman. And when Mandla desperately yelled that her heart had stopped and that he was a doctor, Officer Lincoln scoffed, ignored his pleas, and violently clapped him in handcuffs. What Officer Lincoln didn't know, what he would only find out when paramedics rushed to the scene moments later to take over the rescue, was that he had just assaulted a highly respected physician. He would soon discover that his prejudiced assumptions and reckless actions had nearly cost a woman her life, and that his massive blunder would strip him of his badge and trigger a devastating civil rights lawsuit that would end his career. Before we dive into the full story, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. We love seeing where our viewers are tuning in from. And if you believe a black man performing CPR shouldn't be forcefully arrested for saving a life, hit that like button and subscribe. The local street cafe on that sunny afternoon was a picture-perfect scene of everyday life. The outdoor patio was busy with people enjoying the warm weather. Some were deeply focused on their laptops, while others laughed over iced coffees and pastries. Pedestrians strolled down the tree-lined sidewalk. The air smelled of roasted espresso beans, and it was the kind of relaxed afternoon where nothing could possibly go wrong. Dr. Mandla Charles was walking down that very sidewalk, his pace steady and purposeful. Dressed sharply in a crisp white shirt and dark tie, he was a seasoned medical professional who had spent years navigating the chaotic, high-stakes environment of the hospital. He had seen it all: trauma, sudden strokes, critical accidents, and heart failure. He had performed CPR more times than he could count, pulling patients back from the brink of death when every single second mattered. His mind was likely miles away, unwinding as he walked past the cafe tables. He was just a few yards away when he noticed the woman. Her name was Edna Lola, a white woman wearing a denim jacket and white t-shirt, walking just ahead of him. Mandla had barely registered her presence when her steps suddenly faltered. It happened in the blink of an eye. 1 second she was walking normally, and the next, her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed hard onto the concrete, to the pavement beside her. He rolled her to the pavement beside her. He rolled her onto her back, his hands moving with the swift, practiced precision of a veteran physician. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Mandla's voice was firm, designed to cut through the sudden shock of the moment. No response. He quickly placed 2 fingers against her neck. No pulse. He leaned in, checking her chest. No movement, no breath. Sudden cardiac arrest. The afternoon sun beat down on the avenue, casting long, sharp shadows across the pavement. It was a picture-perfect Saturday, the kind that drew half the city out of their apartments and onto the bustling sidewalks. Outside the popular local street cafe, the air hummed with the relaxed energy of the weekend. Patrons crowded around small, wrought iron tables, sipping iced lattes and laughing over shared pastries. The rich scent of roasted espresso beans mingled with the faint exhaust of passing cars. A chalkboard sign leaned against the brick storefront, and a steady stream of pedestrians navigated the narrow walkway. Among them was Dr. Mandla Charles. Even outside the hospital, he carried himself with the quiet intensity of a man used to the high-stakes pressure of an emergency room. Dressed sharply in a crisp white dress shirt and a dark tie, he moved with a steady, measured stride. His mind was finally beginning to decompress from the chaotic symphony of heart monitors and trauma calls that usually defined his days. A few paces ahead of him walked Edna Lola. Dressed casually in a faded denim jacket layered over a white t-shirt, she seemed completely at ease, her pace unhurried as she navigated the weekend crowd. There was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary about her demeanor. To anyone sitting at the café, it was just another peaceful afternoon in the neighborhood. The clinking of coffee cups and the murmur of casual conversation provided a deceptively calm soundtrack to the street. No one watching could have possibly predicted that in mere seconds, the casual tranquility of the sidewalk was about to completely shatter, turning a quiet afternoon stroll into a desperate, life-or-death battle on the concrete. It happened in a fraction of a heartbeat. One moment, Edna Lola was simply walking past the wrought iron tables, a perfectly ordinary figure against the backdrop of the busy cafe. The next, her stride completely dissolved. There was no stumble, no reaching out for a wall to catch her balance. Her knees buckled outward, and she dropped like a stone, the sudden, heavy thud of her body hitting the sun-baked concrete, cutting straight through the ambient chatter of the patio. For a split second, the street completely froze. Coffee cups halted midway to mouths, conversations snapped shut in shock. But Dr. Mandla Charles didn't freeze. The relaxed demeanor of a man off the clock vanished instantly, replaced by the razor-sharp, adrenaline-fueled focus of a veteran emergency room physician. He was moving before the crowd even had time to gasp, dropping to his knees beside her on the rough, hot pavement. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Mandla's voice boomed over the rising murmur of the crowd, carrying the authoritative weight trained into him through thousands of hours of life-or-death hospital codes. There was no flutter of her eyelids. Her skin was already taking on a terrifying ashen pallor. Mandla placed two steady fingers against the carotid artery on her neck. Nothing. He leaned his ear close to her mouth, his eyes tracking the line of her denim jacket. No breath, no rise and fall of her chest. Sudden cardiac arrest. Edna Lola was dying on the sidewalk. Without wasting a single microsecond, Mandla interlaced his fingers, locked his elbows, and positioned the heel of his hand dead center on her sternum. He drove his weight downward, compressing her chest hard and fast. 1, 2, 3, 4. The brutal, physically exhausting rhythm of survival began. He had to act as her heart, manually forcing oxygenated blood to her brain. He completely blocked out the rising panic of the gathering bystanders, tuning his entire existence to the mechanical pumping of his arms, completely unaware of the disastrous misunderstanding that was about to unfold. 50 feet away, on the opposite side of the sunlit avenue, the reality of the situation warped through the lens of sudden panic and deeply ingrained prejudice. A woman standing near the crosswalk had completely missed the terrifying moment Edna Lola's knees gave out. What caught her attention wasn't the inciting medical emergency, but the immediate, chaotic aftermath. A tall, powerfully built black man in a shirt and tie, violently throwing his weight down onto a motionless white woman on the pavement. From her distant vantage point, she didn't see the precise, locked elbows of a highly trained physician performing life-saving CPR. She didn't hear Mandla's desperate, authoritative shout for the patient to stay with him. Blinded by assumption, her brain instantly filled in the blanks with a horrifying narrative of an unprovoked attack in broad daylight. Instead of crossing the street to help or asking the gathering crowd what was actually happening, she fumbled into her purse with trembling hands and pulled out her smartphone. She dialed 911, her heart hammering against her ribs as the operator answered the line. "Police! I need police right now at the cafe on the corner," she shrieked, her voice high-pitched and breathless. "A man is attacking a woman. He's got her pinned on the ground." Over the line, the dispatcher immediately asked for a description, trying to cut through the caller's rising hysteria. The woman's eyes remained locked onto Dr. Charles as he pushed down on Edna's sternum with relentless, exhausting force, battling the clock to keep oxygen flowing to her dying brain. "He's a black man, white shirt, dark tie. He's right on top of her, just crushing her chest. She's not moving. You have to get someone here before he kills her." Every powerful, rhythmic compression, meant to breathe life back into Edna's failing heart, was tragically relayed to dispatch as an act of savage brutality. In less than 60 seconds, the frantic, heavily flawed testimony of a single unseeing bystander transformed a desperate medical rescue into an active, violent crime scene. Sirens began to wail in the distance, speeding toward an emergency that didn't exist, about to collide disastrously with a man whose only crime was trying to save a stranger's life. Tires shrieking against the asphalt as it slammed into park. The driver's side door burst open before the vehicle had even fully settled. From the shaky, fast-paced perspective of the officer's body camera, the scene unfolded in a chaotic blur of movement. Officer Larry Lincoln stepped out onto the pavement, his hand already instinctively resting on his utility belt. In his ear, the dispatcher's frantic, biased relay was still echoing, a black male actively assaulting a white female on the ground. That singular, poisoned narrative had completely overridden his situational awareness before his boots even hit the sidewalk. He had crippling tunnel vision. Through the lens of the rapidly approaching camera, the nervous crowd parted. In the center of the ring of bystanders, Dr. Mandla Charles was in the fight of his life, or rather, Edna Lola's life. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his pristine white shirt now wrinkled from the sheer physical exertion of manual chest compressions. He was locked in the brutal, exhausting rhythm of CPR, pushing down on Edna's sternum with the intense, practiced force necessary to circulate her stagnant blood. To any medically trained eye, or even a calm observer, the locked elbows and rhythmic counting were unmistakably the desperate actions of a rescuer. But Officer Lincoln wasn't looking for a rescuer. Driven by a volatile mix of adrenaline and the deeply prejudiced 911 report, his brain completely disregarded the obvious medical reality playing out in front of him. He didn't notice the terrifying pallor of the dying woman's skin or the hyper-focused determination in the doctor's eyes. He only saw a large black man forcefully putting his hands on an unresponsive white woman. The heavy thud of the officer's boots closed the distance in seconds. There was no pause to assess the patient. There was no rapid inquiry to the surrounding crowd about what had actually transpired. The critical, golden moments of Edna's survival were about to be hijacked by a blind, dangerous assumption. As Mandla drew a breath to continue the grueling compressions, completely oblivious to the threat rushing up behind him, Officer Lincoln's shadow fell over the scene, setting the stage for a catastrophic confrontation. The body cam footage jerks violently as Officer Larry Lincoln closes the final few feet, his hand dropping from his belt to draw his weapon. He doesn't look at the pale, lifeless face of Edna Lola. He zeroes in entirely on the black man kneeling over her. "Step away from her, you're under arrest!" Lincoln's voice barks over the audio, loud and dripping with adrenaline. Dr. Mandla Charles flinches but doesn't break his rhythm. He is locked into the brutal mechanics of CPR, knowing that any hesitation is a death sentence for his patient. "Get your hands off her now!" Lincoln lunges, grabbing Mandla roughly by the shoulder of his sweat-stained white shirt and yanking him backward with tearing force. The violent separation breaks the crucial flow of chest compressions. Mandla stumbles back onto the concrete, his hands slick with sweat. Panic and raw fury erupt in his eyes as he stares up at the officer. "I'm a doctor, idiot!" Mandla roars, his voice cracking with desperate urgency, pointing frantically at the pavement. Her heart stopped. "If I don't pump her chest, she is going to die." But the words bounce off a wall of entrenched bias. The officer completely ignores the medical reality laid bare in front of him. Lincoln aggressively shoves Mandla face first against the hot brick exterior of the café. The harsh, metallic click of handcuffs ratchets over Mandla's wrists, brutally pinning his life-saving hands behind his back. "Yeah, right. Tell it to the judge," Lincoln sneers, forcefully hauling the restrained physician away. On the sun-baked pavement behind them, Edna Lola remains completely motionless, her golden window of survival rapidly slamming shut as blind prejudice strips away her only lifeline. The wail of a second set of sirens pierced the chaotic shouting, distinct and heavier than a police cruiser. An ambulance tore around the corner, its massive red and white frame shuddering to a halt inches from the curb. The rear doors slammed open before the vehicle was fully in park, and two paramedics sprang out, hauling heavy trauma bags and an AED toward the motionless figure on the pavement. Against the brick wall of the café, Dr. Mandla Charles struggled fruitlessly against the cold steel biting into his wrists. "She's in V-fib. I was doing compressions. She needs a shock now," he roared at the arriving medics, his voice hoarse with desperation, completely ignoring Officer Larry Lincoln's rough grip on his collar. The lead paramedic dropped to his knees next to Edna Lola, tearing open her jacket to attach the defibrillator pads. He glanced up instinctively at the highly accurate medical terminology, his eyes tracking past the aggressive stance of the police officer to land on the man securely pinned against the brickwork. The paramedic froze for a fraction of a second, his hands hovering over the plastic AED casing. Complete recognition washed over his face, instantly replacing his focused intensity with absolute, stunned disbelief. "Dr. Charles," the paramedic blurted out, staring at the esteemed emergency room physician, watching a drop of sweat roll down his face, while he stood completely restrained like a violent criminal. Officer Lincoln's grip faltered slightly, his brow furrowing in sudden sharp confusion. He looked from the kneeling paramedic to the black man he had just violently yanked off a dying woman. "Wait, you know this guy?" Lincoln stammered, the absolute certainty of his prejudiced assumption finally beginning to crack under the weight of reality. "Know him? He's the top attending physician at City General Trauma," the paramedic snapped, turning his horrified gaze back to the officer, his voice laced with pure venom. "He practically runs the ER. What the hell did you do? Did you seriously pull him off an active code?" The reality of the catastrophic blunder hung in the sweltering afternoon air, heavy and suffocating. Without waiting for the stunned officer to process the lethal magnitude of his mistake, the paramedics desperately scrambled to make up for the golden minutes lost, powering on the AED as the harsh mechanical voice of the machine prepared to analyze Edna's rapidly fading heart. The mechanical voice of the automated external defibrillator sliced through the heavy, stunned silence of the gathering crowd. "Analyzing heart rhythm. Do not touch the patient." The lead paramedic hovered his hands over Edna Lola's motionless body, his eyes darting between the flashing lights of the machine and the horrifying tableau of Dr. Mandla Charles forcefully shoved against the café wall in handcuffs. Officer Larry Lincoln stood completely frozen, his hand still gripping the doctor's collar, as the crushing, suffocating weight of his catastrophic blunder finally began to set in. "Shock advised," the AED announced with cold, clinical detachment. "Charging." The paramedic didn't hesitate. "Clear," he shouted, ensuring no one was touching the dying woman. He slammed the flashing orange button. Edna's body convulsed violently, her torso arching off the sun-baked concrete as the heavy electric current tore through her fibrillating heart. The sudden, brutal motion drew a collective gasp from the bystanders, who had, just moments ago, blindly assumed they were witnessing a violent assault. Then came an agonizing 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Suddenly, Edna drew a sharp, ragged gasp, a harsh, tearing sound that echoed like a gunshot down the avenue. Her eyelids fluttered frantically, a faint groan slipping from her lips as the pale, ashen color of death began to retreat from her cheeks. The paramedic immediately pressed 2 fingers to her neck. "We have a pulse. She's back," he yelled, moving swiftly to stabilize her airway with a bag valve mask. Pinned against the rough brickwork, Mandla let his head fall forward, a massive, shuddering wave of relief washing over his sweat-drenched face. The patient was alive. His brutal, exhausting compressions had kept her brain viable just long enough. But for Officer Lincoln, the nightmare was just beginning. The color completely drained from the cop's face as he stared at the breathing woman on the pavement. He hadn't stopped a murder. He had aggressively assaulted the only person keeping her alive. The murmurs of the surrounding crowd shifted instantly from confusion to localized, palpable outrage. Dozens of cell phone cameras, initially recording what they thought was a suspect resisting arrest, were now capturing the undeniable, sickening reality of a racially driven abuse of power. Lincoln slowly turned his gaze back to the furious, highly respected trauma surgeon he had just shackled like a violent felon, realizing with sudden, nauseating clarity that he had just ended his own career. 2 commanding officers stepped out into the rising murmurs of the crowd, this one punctuated by a sharp, authoritative chirp as a police supervisor's SUV aggressively pulled up to the curb. 2 commanding officers stepped out into the chaotic aftermath outside the café. They didn't find the active, violent assault that had been broadcast over the radio. Instead, they found an ambulance crew frantically stabilizing a reviving woman, a crowd of furious bystanders recording the scene on their phones, and their own patrolman standing completely paralyzed, his hand still limply holding the collar of a handcuffed black man in a sweat-drenched shirt and tie. "What the hell is going on here, Lincoln?" the ranking sergeant demanded, his voice cracking like a whip as he took in the highly volatile scene. Before the stunned officer could even stutter a defense, the lead paramedic looked up from Edna Lola's side, pointing a gloved finger straight at Lincoln. "Your guy just assaulted the head of trauma at City General in the middle of an active code. He pulled Dr. Charles off a dying woman to cuff him." The sergeant's eyes snapped to Dr. Mandla Charles. The disastrous reality of the situation hit the supervisor like a physical blow. Without sparing another word for Lincoln, the sergeant crossed the pavement, pulled his own keys, and unlatched the heavy steel cuffs with a sharp click. Mandla rubbed his bruised wrists, his chest heaving as the adrenaline of the rescue collided violently with pure, unadulterated outrage. He didn't step back. He stepped directly into Officer Lincoln's personal space, his intense glare locking onto the now trembling cop. "You didn't ask a single question." Mandla's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that carried perfectly over the hushed crowd, the surrounding cell phone cameras catching every furious syllable. "You saw a black man with his hands on a white woman, and your bias filled in the rest. You didn't see the medical crisis. You didn't hear me yelling that I was a doctor. You nearly killed that woman on the pavement just to satisfy your own prejudice." Lincoln swallowed hard, his face pale, completely unable to meet the physician's blistering gaze. "Get his badge," Mandla snapped, turning his burning stare to the commanding sergeant. "Because by the time my lawyers are done with this department, he'll never wear a uniform again." The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor in room 4 was a beautiful, steady contrast to the absolute chaos of the sun-baked sidewalk hours earlier. Edna Lola sat propped against the crisp white pillows of the cardiac recovery unit, the terrifying, ashen pallor of death replaced by the exhausted, tearful flush of a second chance. When Dr. Mandla Charles stepped through the sliding glass door, still wearing his wrinkled, sweat-stained dress shirt, Edna choked back a sob. She didn't see the violent criminal that Officer Larry Lincoln had so recklessly profiled. She saw the man who had physically refused to let her die. "They told me what happened," Edna whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube as she reached out to weakly grasp his bruised wrist. "They told me what that cop did to you while you were fighting for me. I am so incredibly sorry, Dr. Charles. Thank you for not stopping." Mandla offered a tired but deeply reassuring smile, the hardened edge of the afternoon finally softening. "My oath is to the patient, Edna. Nothing was going to pull me away until you were breathing." But outside the quiet, sterile sanctuary of the hospital room, a massive, unyielding storm was already breaking over the city precinct. The cell phone footage captured by the furious café bystanders had hit the internet like a match to dry kindling, igniting an explosive firestorm of public outrage. By Monday morning, Dr. Charles wasn't just a celebrated local hero, he was the plaintiff in a devastating, high-stakes civil rights lawsuit. Sitting at the polished mahogany table of the city's most aggressive civil litigation firm, Mandla signed the formal complaint that would systematically dismantle Officer Lincoln's career. The instant karma was swift, brutal, and absolute. Crushed by mounting public pressure and the sickening, undeniable video evidence, the police department had no choice but to publicly terminate Lincoln, stripping him of his badge and his authority in disgrace. The multi-million-dollar lawsuit didn't just target the disgraced cop, it put the entire department's dangerously biased practices under a brutal federal microscope. Dr. Mandla Charles had saved a life on the concrete with his bare hands, and with the stroke of a pen, he ensured that the blind, racist arrogance that nearly destroyed it would face a ruinous, highly public reckoning.